Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. The topic for this week is Australian animals. So in this lecture, we are going to first find out why Australian animals are so unique, then learn about the importance of animals to Indigenous Australians. We're going to focus on some particularly interesting or unusual Australian animals, some of which might be familiar to you and some of which might be unfamiliar. Finally, we're going to explore whether Australian animals are really so dangerous. Here's some vocabulary that you might be interested in the lecture. You can listen for these words during the lecture. For A1 and A2 level, you can listen for the words pouch, mammal, and reptile. B1 and B2 level students, try listening for the words marsupial, predator, and placenta. And for C1 and C2 level students, you can try listening for the words megafauna, monotreme, and dagger. I'll say those words one more time. Pouch, mammal, reptile, marsupial, predator, placenta, megafauna, monotreme, dagger. How many Australian animals can you think of? Get a piece of paper or your notebook and make a list. Well, how many were you able to name? Are they animals that are found in other countries as well? Chances are they're not. About 90% of mammals, 70% of birds, 88% of reptiles, and 94% of frogs in Australia are found only in this country, nowhere else. So why is that? $250 million years ago, all of the continents in the world were connected as part of one supercontinent called Pangaea. But gradually, over time, they started to separate. This was known as continental drift. Continental drift is still happening today, and it happens so slowly that we can't feel it. But over a very long period of time, it causes continents to collide or to separate. If you look at the second picture, this is what the world looked like 60 million years ago. So you can see that Australia had separated from most continents, but was still connected to Antarctica. And if you look at now, you can see that Australia had separated from Antarctica and was all by itself. So what did they do? As a result of continental drift and the continents becoming separate, animals could no longer travel between continents. Australia was especially isolated, so it was impossible for animals to travel to and from Australia as they had before. This meant that marsupials, which had before that been very common in many places, died out on many other continents. And in fact, today, marsupials can only be found in Australia and in the Americas. But about 85% of marsupials are found just in Australia. So, what are marsupials? First of all, marsupials are mammals. Mammals are animals with hair. The females have breasts and they feed their babies with milk. Marsupials are a type of mammal. The word marsupial comes from an ancient Greek word meaning pouch. And this is one of the main characteristics of marsupials. They all have a pouch. You can see here some pictures of some Australian marsupials, some of which I'm sure are familiar to you, like the koala, the kangaroo, maybe the wombat. These are some of our most famous animals. But you can also see some equally cute but lesser known animals, such as the possum, the bilby, and the quoll. Unlike other mammals, marsupials don't have a placenta. So what does this mean? It means when their babies are born, they are still in a very early stage and they need more time to develop. How do they do this? In the pouch. Let's take a look at a video of a baby kangaroo being born. A baby kangaroo, in fact all baby marsupials, are known as joeys. So let's look at this video of a joey. So, many years ago, Australia had what was known as megafauna. So what are megafauna? If we look at the name, it tells us the meaning of the word, if we break it down. So fauna, perhaps you know, is another more formal word for animals. In the world we have flora and fauna. Flora means plants, flowers, and fauna, animals. And what about mega? Probably quite easy to guess. Mega means very large. So, do we currently have any megafauna in the world? Of course we do. So you might have thought of elephants, or rhinos, hippos, or even whales. These are all classified as megafauna. So why did megafauna develop? Megafauna developed mostly in areas where they didn't have natural predators, and so they were able to become bigger and bigger without evolutionary pressures. Interestingly, larger animals are quite well known on small islands, which is the opposite of what you might think. Australia had a number of megafauna because it was so separate from other countries, and many animals did not really have much in the way of predators. So let's take a look at Australian megafauna. You can see here some examples, and compared to a human, what they might have looked like. One of them you can see there was basically a kangaroo, like kangaroos today, but much bigger. Imagine coming face to face with a kangaroo 3 meters tall. You might not find it so cute. The biggest example of megafauna in Australia was Diprotodon, the giant wombat. So normal wombats are about 1 meter in length and can be 20 to 25 kilograms. The Diprotodon was 1.8 meters tall, 4 meters long, and up to 2,800 kilograms. But at least he probably wouldn't have attacked you. He was a herbivore. You might have been a little more frightened. A giant goanna, otherwise known as Megalania. So These giant lizards could be up to 20 feet long and 1,000 pounds. They lived from 1.8 million to 50,000 years ago. And their closest living relative is the Komodo dragon. They were bigger than a cow today. So just think about that for a second. So why did these enormous monsters of the past go extinct? Some people think it was because of climate change, the climate becoming drier or colder. But other people think that it had to do with human settlement of Australia. The Indigenous Australians, Aboriginals, first came to Australia between 50 and 60,000 years ago over a land bridge that existed at that time from Asia to Australia. And coincidentally, this is where most animals started to go extinct. So a lot of scientists believe that it was the result of the first Australians hunting them, though it's pretty hard to imagine people hunting these giant animals. Let's talk a little more about Aboriginal Australians and animals. Australian animals are extremely important to the culture of Aboriginal Australians. Indigenous Aboriginal Australians believe that there was a time called the dream time or the dreaming. And this happened before history. This was the time when everything on Earth, the animals, the places, and the people, was created. And the Aboriginal Australians have hundreds of stories called Dreamtime stories that tell how creation took place. At the time, they had no written language, so all of these stories were passed down from one generation to the next. And still, they are passed down today. These stories described how the world was created or tried to explain how the world was created. But they also had moral lessons about how to be a good or bad person in the world. And they believed that many animals represented either good qualities or bad qualities. Here's an example of a story about a greedy frog
Tiddalik
called
the Frog.
Tiddalik.
The story of the Great Flood. In the beginning of time, there was a great frog named Tiddalik who lived in the southern New South Wales. He was bigger than any other frog and wandered around the plains of Riverina. One morning, Tiddalik awoke with a great thirst and began to drink up all the waters from the waterholes, rivers and lakes. He drank until all the waters were held in his swollen body. All the animals and people were dying of thirst, and it was only a matter of time before they all died. A great council of the animals was held to work out a solution. The wise owl suggested that if the frog was made to laugh, the waters would rush out of his mouth and there would be plenty for all. So all the animals gathered around Tiddalik. One after another, they tried their hardest to make him laugh. They danced and performed tricks, but none of them could make Tiddalik laugh. Guru Guru Gaga, the kookaburra, tried out his funniest stories, but the frog remained serious and quiet. There was no sign of any smile. The animals were miserable and worried that they would never make Tiddalik laugh. Suddenly, out of the darkness, slithered Noyang, the eel. He stood up on his tail and began to dance around the frog. He wriggled and jiggled and twisted himself into the most amazing positions. He finished his dance by spinning around so fast that he became a blur. Slowly, the corners of Tiddalik's mouth started to curl and his big fat belly began to wobble as he started to laugh. He tried to hold his sides to stop laughing, but he laughed and laughed until all the water came gushing out. As a result, there was a great flood filling the waterholes, rivers and lakes. The animals and people were no longer thirsty, and the land was restored to a land of paradise, providing food, water and shelter for all.
In this story, Tiddalik the frog drinks up all the water, and the other animals are dry and hot and thirsty. So they all decide to try to make Tiddalik laugh so that the water will come out again. Finally, they make him laugh and the water comes out again and everyone's happy. So on one level, this is a story to try to explain the cycle of floods in Australia. So every year in some parts of Australia, the land becomes extremely dry and then floods. And this was the Indigenous Australians' way of trying to explain that. But on another level, it's a moral story about the importance of sharing resources and sharing knowledge, which was extremely important in their culture. They didn't believe in ownership, and to survive, everybody had to share what they had. Let's talk about some particularly interesting or unusual animals in Australia. First of all, we have the platypus and the echidna, and they are known as monotremes. They are the only members of their family still alive in the whole world. So the platypus and the echidna are very surprising animals. They lay eggs like a bird or a snake, but they are a kind of mammal. And like other mammals, they have hair and they feed their young with milk. They are called monotremes, mono meaning one, because they only have one opening. Most other animals have two, but they have one, called a cloaca. The platypus in particular was an animal that people didn't really believe when it was first found. So when the first Europeans came to Australia and sent back an example of a platypus, people in England thought it was fake. They didn't think that this could be a real animal. How could an animal look like this? How could an animal have a bill like a duck? And in fact, sometimes the platypus is known as the duck-billed platypus, but have fur and swim like a fish. So it took quite a long time for scientists in Europe to accept that this was a real animal. An animal that you probably have heard of is the quokka. Quokkas are native to Western Australia, and this is the only place on Earth that they can be found. Quokkas are primarily found on Rottnest Island, which is a small island off the coast of Perth. There is also a small population that can be found in southwest Australia, near Albany. But this population has been decreasing and is close to being extinct. Luckily, the population on Rottnest Island is booming. They are doing extremely well. So, in fact, the name of Rottnest Island comes from the quokkas. The first explorers, European explorers of Rottnest Island, who were the Dutch, thought that these were large rats, and so they called the island Rottnest Island, which means rat's nest. But of course now we know that they are not rats, but instead they are super cute marsupials. Quokkas usually live for about 10 years, and they are famous these days for quokka selfies. They are sometimes known as the happiest animal in the world because in pictures they always look like they're smiling. Quokkas have no real natural predators on Rottnest Island except for a few snakes, and as a result they're pretty fearless. They're not afraid of humans and will quite happily come up and try to get food from you. However, you should not feed them and you should definitely not touch them because they are still wild animals. Another fascinating animal in Australia is the cassowary. The cassowary is the third largest bird in the world after the ostrich and the emu. But it is the world's heaviest bird and can weigh up to 73 kilograms. Cassowaries are famous for their appearance. They are brightly coloured, and as you can see, they have a large horn on their head. They are descended from dinosaurs, which perhaps explains their appearance. The name of the cassowary comes from two Papuan words, kassu meaning horned and weri meaning head. Cassowaries can be found only in Queensland in Australia, and they can also be found in Papua New Guinea. Unfortunately, these birds are now quite endangered. Cassowaries are, many people say, the world's most dangerous bird. They have a claw in the middle of their hand, which is 12 centimeters long and can act like a dagger. So they have caused some deaths in the past, and even though they are shy birds and will mostly stay away from you if you stay away from them, certainly they have caused some shock to a few joggers running around parks in Queensland. If you've ever watched Looney Tunes
He will shut up in a sec. So I mentioned before, when the devils come together and squabble, they come together and mouth each other. Now they do hit each other quite hard. So what I'm doing...
But why are they called devils? It's a pretty negative name. Well, they got this name because of the sounds they make. They make an incredible screeching noise, and when settlers first heard this, they thought, oh, they sound like devils. So, this is what they called them. Most marsupials in Australia and in the world are herbivorous. They only eat plants. But the Tasmanian devil is a carnivorous marsupial, and they will eat almost anything. They're not particularly large. They're only about 30 centimeters high usually, but they have extremely powerful jaws and they are very aggressive. So these small animals have been known to take down cows or large kangaroos. Sadly, Tasmanian devils are now endangered. This is because of a disease called facial tumour disease, which has appeared in the population and has caused some populations of Tasmanian devils to go down by about 90%. Scientists are currently searching for a vaccine to cure this disease. So, devils are the largest marsupial, the largest carnivorous marsupial, unless you believe that the thylacine is still alive. The thylacine was otherwise known as the Tasmanian tiger. It became extinct on mainland Australia 3,000 years ago, but the last one known died in a Tasmanian zoo in the 1930s. Many people, however, refuse to believe that the Tasmanian tiger is actually extinct. And every year there are sightings by people who believe it is still alive. And if you go to YouTube, you can see some videos that people have posted claiming to have seen Tasmanian tigers. However, none of these have actually been accepted by scientists. And if you watch the videos, they're usually pretty unclear. But it doesn't stop people trying, and even some magazines and famous rich people have posted rewards for up to $1 million for anyone who can prove that the thylacine is still around. So, what about dangerous Australian animals? Some people believe that Australia is the most dangerous country in the world. What do you think? Here are some animals that people think are dangerous in Australia. Do you know the names of the animals? Which of them do you think is the most dangerous? First of all, about spiders. In Australia, there are 836 different species of spider. And that might freak you out, but the vast majority of them are completely harmless to humans, even the ones that look big and scary. And some of them are quite beautiful. So if you look at the first picture at the top, this is an example of a peacock spider. Look at those beautiful colors. Spiders also play an important role in the ecology of Australia. If you've ever complained about the flies and mosquitoes in Australia, then be thankful for spiders. If it wasn't for spiders, we'd have a lot more of these. But there are some dangerous spiders in Australia, and you can see pictures of the two most dangerous here on the page. The redback and the funnel web spider. Both of them have an extremely painful bite. The funnel web spider is only found in the east of Australia, so you won't see any of those here in Perth. But redbacks are quite common. Only the females are dangerous, and you can tell them by the big red stripe down their back. They're very distinctive. Mostly, they like to hide. So redbacks can be found under things usually, under tables, under chairs, and in a famous Australian song from a long time ago, under toilet seats. There's a famous Australian song, there was a redback on the toilet seat. But you don't have to worry, this doesn't happen that often. And even though their bite might be extremely painful, there have been no deaths from any spider in Australia since 1979. What about snakes? Australia has the most venomous snakes of any country on the planet. And because of this, towns and cities in Australia will usually employ snake catchers. These are people who their job is to go and catch dangerous snakes. So if you do see a snake, don't try to catch it yourself. Stay away and call your local snake catcher. So let's have a look at 3 particularly dangerous snakes. First is the tiger snake. And as you can see here, they're quite colourful. They have yellow and grey markings. One thing that's interesting about these snakes is that they can climb very well. So they're often found up trees, on ladders, or on roofs of houses. Another kind of snake that is found in Australia is the taipan. A taipan has enough venom in one bite to kill 100 people. But don't worry, they're pretty shy. So it's highly unlikely that a taipan will actually want to bite you. Usually they're going to run away. And the most dangerous is this very boring looking snake in the left-hand corner with a very boring name as well. It is simply called a brown snake. Brown snakes are found all over Australia and they have caused more deaths than any other snake. The next animal is the saltwater crocodile. Have you ever heard the expression, never smile at a crocodile? Well, maybe that's because they are the largest reptile in the world. Scientists are still having trouble calculating crocodiles' aging process. They are so perfectly evolved and they have lived for so many millions of years without changing that we really don't know exactly how they age. They even seem to stop aging. Some other interesting facts about saltwater crocodiles: they can hold their breath underwater for a full hour. So often crocodiles will stay very, very still underwater. If you've ever seen one in a zoo, you might have seen them almost looking like a statue. Sometimes just their eyes are coming out of the top of the water, so they can stay absolutely still. They can slow down their heartbeat to just 3 or 4 beats a minute. And they wait for their prey to come up, and then suddenly they catch. Crocodiles are probably one of the only animals on this list that will intentionally attack humans and will eat humans. Most animals, if they bite humans, it's a mistake. They're not really interested. But crocodiles, they will go for humans. They're not afraid. Crocodiles have the strongest jaws of any animal and the strongest downward bite pressure. but they are extremely weak in opening their jaws. So, if you could catch a crocodile with its mouth closed and put your hand around its jaw, even one hand, they will be unable to open it. I'm not sure if you want to try this out, but it's a possible technique if you see a crocodile and you don't want it to bite you. Some people have also said that you can surprise a crocodile by hitting it on the nose and it will open its jaws and let you go. I'm not sure if I'd want to try that one either. Another animal that in some ways is quite similar to a crocodile is the shark. Maybe more than any other animal, sharks are associated with Australia and with fear. So, what about sharks? One thing about sharks is that unlike other fish and sea creatures, they can maintain their temperature. Most fish are cold-blooded, and so they have to stay in warm areas. But not sharks. Sharks are actually extremely good at maintaining their body temperature. This means they can live anywhere in any kind of waters. Good for them, but maybe not so good for us. Sharks are found all over Australia. 85% of shark species classified as dangerous, which means they have bitten humans, are found in Australia. And there are 3 species in particular that are known as dangerous to humans. The first, which you can see down the bottom, is the bull shark. The second, in the middle there, is a tiger shark. But the first, and by far the most well known, is the great white shark. Great white sharks are the most famous kind of sharks, but not in a good way, probably more notorious. Great white sharks were made famous by the film Jaws, and these days in Australia, many people are afraid of great white sharks coming close to beaches and biting people. In fact, sharks are not really interested in people. They don't find people tasty. And when sharks have bitten people, it's a mistake. So if a shark bites you, it's usually because they've mistaken you for their normal prey. The normal prey of sharks is seals, and that's one reason that they often end up biting surfers. Surfers wear wetsuits, and the wetsuits make them seem like seals. If you want to avoid getting bitten by a shark, don't worry, it's not too hard. Just avoid dangerous conditions. Make sure you always swim between the flags on the beach. Try to avoid swimming at dusk and dawn, sunset and sunrise, because this is the shark's natural feeding period. And try not to go too far out. The further you go out in the water, the more you're going into sharks' territory. But sharks are not the only dangerous things that you can find in the ocean in Australia. There are 2 small creatures that, if you ask me, are more dangerous than a shark. Certainly, I'd be more scared of them if I was getting in the water. The first is the blue-ringed octopus. It is a tiny and beautiful animal. but also an extremely dangerous one. A blue-ringed octopus is only 12 to 20 centimeters, but if they sting you, they can cause total paralysis and death in minutes. Probably the scariest thing about the blue-ringed octopus is that unlike other species, snakes or spiders that I've talked about, there is no anti-venom available. So, if you get stung by a blue-ringed octopus, you'd better cross your fingers. Another animal that can be extremely dangerous is the box jellyfish. The box jellyfish, luckily, is not found everywhere in Australia, and neither is the blue-ringed octopus. In fact, we don't really have these in Western Australia. The box jellyfish is found in tropical areas, especially around the Great Barrier Reef. One thing about the box jellyfish is that some people say it has the most painful venom of any creature. Their stings are said to be agonizingly painful. So even if you survive, you might wish you were dead. Which of these do you think is the most dangerous animal in Australia? The answer is none of them. The most dangerous animal in Australia is an animal that you probably don't think of as dangerous, and an animal which can be found all over the world. It is the horse. So horses, since the year 2000, have caused almost 100 deaths in Australia. By comparison, sharks have only caused about 23 deaths. Snakes have only caused about 26 deaths. Crocodiles have only caused about 17 deaths. And spiders haven't caused any deaths. So, maybe you don't need to be so afraid of those dangerous animals. And remember, all deaths by animals are far fewer than deaths from other causes in Australia. So the same time period that these deaths happened from animals, all of which were under 100, there were more than 4,000 deaths from drowning in Australia. And of course, many deaths from car accidents or just other kinds of accidents like falling down. So when people talk about dangerous animals in Australia and they say, oh, I'd be so scared to come to Australia because of all the snakes and the spiders and the sharks, you can tell them that it's really not that bad. So today we've talked about Australian animals, the history of Australian animals and why they are so unique. We've talked about Indigenous Australians and how animals are important to their culture. We've looked at some particularly interesting or unusual animals in Australia. Can you remember some of their names? Like the platypus, the echidna, the quokka, the cassowary, the Tasmanian devil, and the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. Finally, we talked about dangerous animals in Australia and whether they really were as dangerous as people say. And I think the answer is not really. Did you hear some of the vocabulary? I hope so. So just a reminder of some of those words. You had pouch, marsupial, monotreme, megafauna, dagger, mammal. If you want to know more about some of these words, you can check them up or ask your teacher. Thank you very much.